On Monday, April 28, 1986, at 9 in the morning, a worker at the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden walked through a routine radiation checkpoint at the entrance. The alarm went off. Engineers searched every room, every pipe, every surface. Inside the plant, nothing. The contamination was coming from outside, on the wind, from 1,000 kilometers away. While Swedish scientists were trying to understand what was happening, 2,000 kilometers to the east in the city of Pripyat, children were going to school. Women were carrying groceries home from the store. Men were heading to work, and nobody knew that their city no longer existed in the sense they understood that word. This is not a film about a nuclear catastrophe. This is a film about what happens when a system built to protect people begins to protect itself. At 1 hour and 6 minutes past midnight on April 25th, the shift supervisor gave the order to reduce power in reactor number 4, a routine command. Commands like this had been given dozens of times in that same control room, under those same fluorescent lights. The city of Pripyat was asleep. 50,000 people, 9 kilometers from the plant. In the park stood a new Ferris wheel. It was scheduled to open in 6 days for May Day. Nobody knew that the next 72 hours would make their city uninhabitable for the next 24,000 years. The reactor at the Chernobyl plant had a design characteristic that the night shift operators had never been officially informed about. It is called a positive void coefficient. In plain language, at low power, the reactor became less stable as it heated up, meaning it behaved in exactly the opposite way to how a safe reactor should behave. This was known. It was documented. The night shift operators were not told. Hold that thought. Everything that followed is downstream of that single institutional fact, deliberately, as part of the test procedure, so it would not interfere with the test results. 24 hours, 9 hours of waiting. A dispatcher from Kyiv asked them not to reduce power. The city needed electricity. The reactor sits. Emergency cooling switched off. The experienced day shift finishes and goes home. At midnight, the night shift arrives. The people who had spent the whole day preparing for this test, they left. In walked those who did not fully understand the conditions of what they were about to do. 00:28. Reactor power falls off a cliff. Instead of the planned 701,000 megawatts, 500, then 30, almost zero, the reactor effectively dead. A condition that, because of that same void coefficient, made bringing the power back up extraordinarily dangerous. Shift foreman Alexander Akimov and senior reactor control engineer Leonid Toptunov made the decision. Don't stop the test. Recover the power. They withdrew the control rods. Per RBMK regulations, a minimum of 15 rods must remain inserted in the reactor at all times. Post-accident calculations showed, at that moment, there were 8 against a minimum of 15 in an unstable reactor, with the emergency cooling system switched off. The shift supervisor made the decision to proceed. I want you to understand this man, not to excuse him, but to understand him. Soviet culture at nuclear facilities in 1986 was a culture in which a junior engineer did not question a senior supervisor's judgment. The Soviet Union had built its post-war identity on technological superiority. In 1981, a Soviet scientist went on television and said that a nuclear reactor exploding was absolutely impossible. Impossible even to imagine. That was the atmosphere in which Akimov pressed the button at 1:23 in the morning. At 1:23 and 4 seconds, the test began. The valves closed. The turbine began to wind down, and almost immediately, the power began to surge. The reactor had gone out of control. In a panic, the word panic is documented in survivor testimony, Toptunov pressed the emergency shutdown button, AZ5. All control rods were supposed to drop simultaneously. The rods jammed. The RBMK control rods had a design flaw that operators had never been properly informed about. The graphite tips upon entering the core caused a brief spike in reactivity before suppressing it. In those 3 to 4 seconds of jamming, the reactor's power output jumped to 300 times its maximum rated capacity. At 1:24, reactor number 4 exploded. Not once, twice. The first explosion destroyed the pressure channels. The second blew the 1,000-ton reinforced concrete lid off the reactor building and expelled the burning graphite core into the open air. The amount of radioactive material released into the atmosphere, according to the IAEA's assessment, was 400 times the combined radiation of the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Valery Kodomchuk, an engineer in the pump room of Unit 4, was killed instantly. His body was never recovered. He was 35 years old. He became the first in a list that remains a subject of dispute to this day, from 4,000 to 93,000 human lives. And the reason we are still arguing about that number has everything to do with what happened in the hours that followed. At 1:28 in the morning, 4 minutes after the explosion, the chief engineer, having received reports from operators he had sent to inspect the damage, operators who were already dying from acute radiation sickness as they made their way through the plant's corridors, announced the reactor is intact. It was a hydrogen explosion. Everything is under control. It was not under control. At 1:28, 2 people were already dying. Firefighters from Pripyat Fire Station Number 2, Vladimir Pravik and Viktor Kibanok, received the call at 1:28. Fire alarm, reactor building. Their radiation measurement instruments maxed out at 3.6 Röntgen per hour and stopped there. The actual radiation level on the roof of the reactor building that night exceeded 15,000 Röntgen per hour. The lethal dose for a human being is 400 Röntgen of total exposure. Run those numbers through yourself. They didn't know. Nobody told them. And so they did what they came to do. They fought the fire. Fire engine driver Grigory Kmel later testified, "They arrived at around 10 minutes to 2 in the morning. They saw chunks of graphite scattered everywhere on the ground. He kicked one with his foot. Another firefighter picked up a piece and said, 'Hot.' Neither of them knew anything about radiation. His colleagues climbed the ladder to the roof of the reactor building. He never saw them again." Let's stop on that sentence, because it contains the entire mechanism of what was killing people in those first hours. Not the explosion, not the reactor, but the fact that the people sent there did not know where they were going. This is not carelessness on the part of the firefighters. This is an institutional decision not to inform, at any cost, to preserve the appearance of a controlled situation. Lieutenant Pravik called his wife at around 3 in the morning. According to testimony, he told her he felt sick, that something was wrong. He died 14 days later in Moscow Hospital Number 6. He was 23 years old. At 10:00 a.m. on April 27th, note the date carefully. This is already the following day, 36 hours after the explosion. Helicopters finally began dropping sand, clay, lead, boron, and dolomite into the burning core. Around 600 pilots risked lethal doses of radiation. Each pass over the reactor lasted 40 to 60 seconds. Radiation levels in the cockpits exceeded a lifetime's permissible exposure. Some pilots flew multiple sorties per day. Beneath the reactor building, a new threat was forming. The molten core could burn through the floor into the water reservoir directly below it. Some Soviet scientists' calculations suggested the steam explosion that could result would destroy the other 3 reactors at the plant and render a significant portion of Europe uninhabitable. Firefighters descended into flooded underground corridors and pumped the water out manually. Their names are in the records of the Ukrainian Chernobyl Union. Most of them survived, some did not. All of them received radiation doses that the Soviet Commission's classified medical reports, declassified after 1991, identified as guaranteeing irreversible health damage. Over 1 million people entered the zone. They were called liquidators. They did not save a city, they saved a continent. And while they were doing it, the authorities were deciding how to present this. May 1st, 1986. 5 days after the explosion, in Kiev and Minsk, the capitals of two republics lying directly in the path of the radioactive cloud, the traditional May Day parades went forward. Red flags, portraits of Soviet leaders, children in school uniforms, people lining the streets. I checked this 3 times before saying it out loud. Radiation monitors in Kiev that day were recording levels that, according to the Ukrainian government's own retrospective analysis, should have triggered immediate public health warnings. No warnings were issued. The decision was made to hold the parade. At 2 p.m. on April 27th, 36 hours after the explosion, the residents of Pripyat were finally informed of the evacuation. Not on television, not on the radio. Through loudspeakers on the streets, a voice announced, "The evacuation is temporary. Take only the essentials. You will return in 3 days." Around 115,000 people came out of their buildings carrying small bags. Women carried children. People took documents and a little clothing. Some left food on tables for 3 days. Some left their pets behind. Special hunting squads would later shoot them to prevent them from spreading contamination beyond the exclusion zone. They never came back. Nobody told them that at the time. And the contaminated milk, the milk carrying iodine-131, absorbed by the thyroid glands of children across the contaminated region, was being consumed for 11 more days after the explosion, because the recommendation not to consume local dairy products was not issued for 11 days. Even though the Soviet monitoring data had already identified this milk as dangerous. The WHO documented approximately 6,000 cases of thyroid cancer in children who were exposed at that time. The vast majority, treatable, provided there was a diagnosis, provided there was a functioning healthcare system, provided someone had told the truth in time. 11 days, because of the same institutional calculation that kept the parade marching through invisible fallout. Because acknowledging the danger required acknowledging the scale of the accident. Acknowledging the scale of the accident required acknowledging the institutional failures that produced it. And the system was incapable of that acknowledgement without unraveling something far larger than a public health warning. The official Soviet position attributed 31 deaths to the accident. 31 for an event that released 400 times the radiation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined, contaminated 200,000 square kilometers, and forced the evacuation of more than 300,000 people. 31. That number was printed in Soviet newspapers. The WHO 2006 Chernobyl Forum report, approximately 4,000 deaths from radiation-induced cancers. The Greenpeace 2006 assessment, around 93,000. The International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, 2007, around 60,000. Among the liquidators alone. The official Soviet figure, 31. I want to be precise. The reason these figures diverge so dramatically is not simply that one side is lying and the other is telling the truth. The reason is more fundamental. It is a question of methodology. How do you count radiation-induced cancer deaths in a population that was already experiencing cancer across 3 countries over decades? This is genuinely difficult science. But here is what the documents show with a precision that cannot be disputed. The classified reports of the Soviet Ministry of Health were recording elevated rates of cancer and other radiation-related conditions in the affected population from as early as 1987, 1 year after the accident. This data was classified. It was not shared with the affected populations. It was not shared with international health organizations. It was filed in archives that remained closed for years, and in some cases for decades, after the political circumstances that had justified their classification had ceased to exist. The Ukrainian National Commission on Radiation Protection, in a report published in 2011, 25 years after the accident, documented that the full scope of the Soviet health monitoring data had still not been transferred to Ukrainian health authorities. The records exist, their location is known. The transfer simply has not been completed. The Commission described this in language that is, for an official document, remarkably direct. The incomplete transfer of health records had materially impaired Ukraine's ability to provide appropriate medical monitoring and support to the affected population. Materially impaired. That is the phrase. In a document published 25 years after the explosion about a problem that remains unresolved. The exclusion zone today covers approximately 2,600 square kilometers of northern Ukraine. The city of Pripyat stands exactly as it was left on April 27, 1986. The Ferris wheel that never turns still stands in the amusement park. It is rusting. The forest is growing around it. In 2016, researchers documented something unexpected. The exclusion zone, 2,600 square kilometers of land declared too radioactively contaminated for human habitation, had become one of the most ecologically rich wildlife refuges in Europe. Brown bears returned to forests they had not inhabited in over a century. Wolves are present at densities 7 times higher than in comparable uncontaminated reserves. Elk, lynx, eagles, beavers, and wild boar move freely across lands that were once agricultural fields. The researchers were careful about what they concluded. They were not claiming that radiation is good for wildlife. The point they were making is more uncomfortable than that. The point is that the removal of human beings from that landscape, the farms, the roads, the hunting, the development, the entire apparatus of human occupation, created ecological conditions so favorable that wildlife populations are thriving despite the radiation. The most contaminated place in Europe is, by certain measurable ecological criteria, healthier than the land surrounding it. I am not offering that as comfort. The zone is not a success story, not a silver lining. It is a 2,600 square kilometer monument to what it costs when a system places its own preservation above the safety of the people it was built to protect. Every wolf running through those forests is running across a land that belonged to someone. Every building disappearing into vegetation was someone's home. The liquidators who are still alive are in their 60s and 70s. Many are in poor health. Many are still fighting for recognition of conditions that the documents connect to their service, and that the official records have spent 40 years finding reasons not to fully acknowledge. The Soviet scientist who went on television in 1981 and said that a nuclear reactor exploding was absolutely impossible was not lying in the sense of knowing the truth and deliberately stating the opposite. He was sincerely expressing what the institutional culture around him had made it possible to believe. The shift supervisor who pressed the button at 1:23 in the morning is not a villain. He was a trained professional operating within a system that gave him insufficient information, an inadequate safety culture, and a set of institutional incentives in which stopping the test felt more dangerous to his career than continuing it. The firefighters who climbed the ladder to the roof of the reactor building and never came back down are heroes in the only sense that word can honestly be used. People who walked into a situation they did not fully understand because their training, their culture, and their sense of duty required it of them. The 4th reactor is now sealed beneath the new safe confinement, a massive steel arch completed in 2016, funded by international contributions from more than 45 countries. It cost over €1.5 billion. It is designed to last 100 years. It was paid for 4 decades later by countries that had nothing whatsoever to do with the decision to run a dangerous test on an unstable reactor in the middle of the night with the emergency cooling system switched off. The archive is open, the documents are there, the liquidator testimonies are there, the IAEA reports are there, the classified Soviet medical records, in whatever incomplete form they survived the dissolution of the state that created them. are there. The gap between what the dosimeter read and what the official record showed is there. Documented, measurable, expressed in the difference between 31 deaths and a number we may never know. What happened at 1:23 in the morning on April 26, 1986, took 14 seconds, from the pressing of a button to the destruction of a reactor. What happened in the 60 hours that followed? The silence, the parades, the firefighters on the roof, the pilots in the helicopters, the families told they were leaving for 3 days, took the rest of a decade to partially acknowledge, and 40 years to begin to honestly reckon with. The zone is quiet now. The wolves are running, the forests are growing, and somewhere in an archive, a dosimeter reading recorded at a number it was never supposed to show is still sitting in a file that not enough people have read. The dramatic category